Every monument hides a story. Every stone whispers a past. Welcome to History Vault, where history comes alive. In the heart of Philadelphia stands a building of red brick and white stone, yet it holds within its walls the echoes of revolutions, the whispers of forgotten voices, and the shadows of men who dare to challenge empires. Independence Hall is not merely a monument. It is a mystery, a witness to secrets untold, where history and myth still intertwine. Some call it the birthplace of freedom. Others believe it guards truths too great to be revealed. Tonight, we step inside those walls, where time itself seems reluctant to move on. On a warm July morning in 1776, the air in Philadelphia seemed thick with both fear and possibility. Inside a modest red brick building that today the world knows as Independence Hall, men gathered in secrecy, their whispers guarded, their movements deliberate. The windows were kept closed despite the summer heat, not for comfort but for caution, as the stakes of their meeting could mean life or death. For within those walls, a colony still under the shadow of the British crown was about to take the most daring leap in history, to declare its independence. Imagine the scene, the creak of wooden chairs, the scratching of quills on parchment, and the uneasy glances exchanged between men who were not merely politicians but rebels. At any moment, discovery could bring the gallows. Yet here they were, debating whether to sever ties with the mightiest empire of the age. The mood oscillated between fiery passion and heavy silence. Some delegates pushed urgently for freedom, their voices trembling with conviction, while others hesitated, fearful of the chaos that could follow. Independence was not inevitable. It was contested, argued over, and deeply uncertain. As the days wore on, the discussions became stormy, the language bold, and the divisions sharp. John Adams of Massachusetts, known for his fierce energy, pressed relentlessly for action, while John Dickinson of Pennsylvania urged caution, clinging to the hope of reconciliation. These debates were not just political, they were personal gambles. Each signature on a declaration would paint a target on the signer's back. They were risking their wealth, their reputations, even their families. And yet, despite the shadows of doubt, momentum gathered, like a tide that could no longer be held back. Then came the words that would change history, words drafted by a quiet yet brilliant Virginian named Thomas Jefferson. By candlelight, Jefferson composed sentences that carried both poetry and defiance, declaring that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with unalienable rights, and that governments derive their powers from the consent of the governed. In a world ruled by monarchs and empires, these ideas were nothing short of revolutionary. When Jefferson presented his draft to the Hall, it was not met with immediate applause. Paragraphs were struck out, lines were debated, and revisions filled the margins. Still, the essence remained intact. A bold statement to the world that a new nation was ready to be born. Outside, Philadelphia bustled unaware of the exact drama unfolding inside, yet rumors spread, and the city pulsed with anticipation. On July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress voted for independence. 2 days later, the Declaration was formally adopted, and though the signing would continue for weeks, the vision of a nation free from Britain had been sealed. Within Independence Hall, men took up quills and pressed their names onto parchment, their signatures glowing like defiance against the crown. The hall itself seemed to absorb the gravity of that act, its wooden beams and brick walls now witnesses to treason that would transform into liberty. But mystery clings to those days. Few detailed accounts survive of the exact proceedings. The curtains were drawn tight, the records deliberately sparse, for secrecy was vital. What exactly was said behind closed doors? What emotions surged through the delegates as they put pen to parchment? History leaves us with fragments, yet the aura of that moment continues to haunt the hall. Visitors who stand within the assembly room today often describe a shiver, as if the air itself still carries the echoes of voices arguing about freedom. The decision was not unanimous at first, and the courage it demanded was immense. Benjamin Franklin, ever the wit, remarked after signing that they must all hang together, or surely they would all hang separately. These men knew the price of failure: confiscated estates, imprisonment, execution. Yet their gamble was guided by faith in an ideal larger than themselves, that liberty was worth any cost. Independence Hall, at that instant, became more than just a building. It became a crucible where ideals were forged, a silent witness to the birth of a nation. Its brick walls no longer belonged merely to Pennsylvania. They belonged to history. The Declaration of Independence was more than a document. It was a spark. From the 13 colonies to distant lands, it signaled that ordinary people could challenge kings, that freedom could rise from rebellion, and that a nation could be founded not on bloodlines, but on principles. And yet, the irony lingered. Even as the delegates declared that all men are created equal, slavery still persisted, women remained voiceless, and native peoples faced displacement. The hall carried within it both the triumph of vision and the shadow of contradiction. That paradox continues to intrigue historians and stir debate today. Was this truly the birthplace of freedom, or was it merely the beginning of a struggle still unfinished? The mystery lingers, giving Independence Hall its enduring power. Centuries later, when visitors walk into that chamber, they don't just see a room with old chairs and faded desks. They step into a living memory, a place where men defied an empire with nothing but words and conviction. The silence there feels heavy, not empty. It is filled with the invisible presence of Adams urging action, Jefferson drafting with quiet intensity, Franklin cracking a joke to lighten the fear, and 56 men deciding to risk everything for the chance of liberty. The hall where a nation was born continues to whisper its story. It is a reminder that freedom was not handed down. It was carved out by those willing to stake their lives on a fragile piece of parchment. In that small room, amid the heat of a Philadelphia summer, the destiny of millions yet unborn was written. The years that followed the signing of the Declaration of Independence were anything but secure for the fragile idea of a nation. The ink on the parchment had barely dried before war descended like a storm, testing whether the bold words drafted in Philadelphia could survive the brutal weight of reality. Independence Hall, once a chamber of heated debates and whispered fears, transformed into something far more tangible. It became a command center, a wartime nerve hub where decisions of strategy and survival echoed through its walls. The elegant assembly room where Jefferson's words had been debated was now filled with maps, dispatches, and the tense presence of men wrestling with the enormity of rebellion against one of the world's greatest empires. George Washington himself, though not often present in Hall during these pivotal years, was never far from its spirit. His letters, read aloud in that very room, carried the desperation of an army starving, freezing and bleeding, yet still refusing to yield. Congress met beneath the soaring timbers of the chamber, debating how to finance a war with empty coffers, how to clothe men without shoes, how to fight when gunpowder was scarce and hope itself seemed like a vanishing resource. Independence Hall was no longer only the birthplace of liberty. It became the very engine keeping that liberty alive. Yet, shadows lingered over its bricks. Philadelphia was a prize for the British, a jewel of the colonies, and the threat of capture was constant. In 1777, as the British advanced, Congress fled the city, carrying with them the weight of the Revolution. Independence Hall fell silent, abandoned to the enemy. The once rebellious chamber became a stage of occupation. Red-coated soldiers marched the cobbled streets outside, and the building itself, stripped of its revolutionary fervor, stood like a hostage. Within its walls, the echoes of defiance were replaced with the footsteps of foreign boots. To imagine those months is to picture the contrast. Where Jefferson's words of freedom had soared, British officers now plotted, using the very same space as their stronghold. But history is layered with ironies, and Independence Hall absorbed them all. When the British finally retreated, Congress returned, as if the building itself had survived an ordeal alongside the nation. Once again, the assembly room filled with urgency. Debates rang out about alliances with France, about loans from Europe, about sustaining an army that seemed to shrink with every battle. Outside, cannon fire still thundered on distant fields, but inside, the fight was waged with words, diplomacy, and fragile strategy. And then there were the stories, half hidden, half remembered, that cloaked the hall in mystery. Visitors in later years spoke of hearing faint footsteps in the upper galleries, of feeling drafts that seemed too purposeful to be mere wind, of shadows passing across the chamber when no one stood there. Could it be the restless spirits of those who had gambled everything within those walls? Could it be the lingering essence of men who signed away their lives to a cause that at the time looked doomed? Such tales remind us that buildings, like people, carry memories, and perhaps Independence Hall, in its silence, remembers more than it reveals. The war years forged the Hall's identity not only as a birthplace, but as a battlefield of ideas. It was here that Congress approved the Articles of Confederation in 1777, a desperate attempt to knit 13 fractious colonies into something resembling a functioning government. The Articles were imperfect, fragile, often failing in practice, but they were born in that chamber, an experiment in unity born out of necessity. The Hall became the arena where freedom was defined, tested, and redefined, a place where survival depended as much on words as on muskets. By the war's end, Independence Hall had aged. Its brick walls bore the strain of occupation, abandonment, and return, much like the country itself. Yet it stood unwavering, as if destined to outlive the turmoil of its age. Visitors today often marvel at its quiet dignity, but one must imagine the noise it once held, the arguments, the shouts, the sighs of exhausted men, the scratching of quills racing against time. Within that noise, the very DNA of America was written, and still, questions remain. What secrets were whispered in its corners when defeat loomed? Which debates were so fierce that they were never recorded in the official journals, buried instead in silence? Did the Hall's walls hear despair when winter froze the army at Valley Forge? Or did they hear determination when news of French aid finally reached Congress? History gives us fragments, but the mystery endures, making the Hall more than just a monument. It is a riddle of survival wrapped in red brick. When the Revolution ended in 1783 and victory was declared, Independence Hall stood not only as a birthplace of rebellion, but as its guardian to the darkest hours. It had been occupied by enemies, deserted by patriots, reclaimed by the dream of freedom, and finally, it witnessed a triumph of the impossible. The colonies had prevailed. The Hall, once a silent colonial meeting place, was now a global symbol, proof that empires could be challenged and liberty could endure. Today, as sunlight filters through its tall windows and dust settles on its ancient wooden desks, one can almost hear the echoes of those years. The hushed debates of congressmen, the ghostly presence of soldiers, the weary voices asking if the cause could survive another winter. Independence Hall is not merely a building where independence was declared. It is a witness to war, to loss, to fragile hope, and to ultimate victory. Its walls do not just tell us what happened. They remind us of what nearly didn't. The war had ended, but the struggle for identity was only beginning. When the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783, the dream of independence became a reality. Yet what followed was perhaps even more uncertain than the revolution itself. The 13 colonies were free, but freedom alone was fragile without structure, without law, without unity. And once again, Independence Hall became the stage upon which the destiny of a nation was tested. Its assembly room, once filled with revolutionary cries, now bore the weight of governance, compromise, and the haunting question of whether the experiment of liberty could truly survive. In the years after victory, the Articles of Confederation guided the fledgling states, but what had seemed sufficient during wartime quickly revealed its cracks in peace. Independence Hall hosted debates that stretched late into the night as representatives wrestled with failures they could no longer ignore. There was no strong central government, no reliable way to raise money, no unified direction for foreign policy. The young country staggered like a child learning to walk, threatened not by British bayonets now, but by its own disunity. Within those walls, men argued fiercely over taxation, trade, and representation. The Hall, with its tall windows and sturdy timbers, heard voices not of revolution this time, but frustration, anxiety, and fear of collapse. It was within this atmosphere of uncertainty that whispers began to circulate. The revolution had birthed freedom, but could it also birth chaos? Some feared that the experiment would dissolve into the very tyranny it had resisted. Others wondered whether monarchy itself would return, cloaked in American clothing. Rumors, speculation, and suspicion drifted through Philadelphia like smoke, and Independence Hall became the crucible where these anxieties were confronted. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention convened, forever altering the destiny of the United States. Once more, the assembly room became sacred ground. Its green-covered tables bore maps, drafts, and quills, while men like James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, and George Washington gathered under the carved royal canopy that had once symbolized a British crown. The irony was not lost. Beneath that symbol of monarchy, they sought to create a republic that could endure without one. The debates were heated, sometimes bitter, and at times it seemed the room might fracture as surely as the nation itself. Independence Hall, already a witness to revolution, now became the birthplace of government. Washington presided with silence, his very presence anchoring proceedings. Franklin, old and frail, called for compromise, warning that perfection was impossible but unity was essential. Madison meticulously recorded arguments, shaping the blueprint of a nation. Behind those closed doors, guarded from the public and the press, secrecy cloaked the debates. No one knew what words were exchanged, what tempers flared, what alliances formed and dissolved. To this day, mystery surrounds those long summer months. We know the outcome, a constitution unlike any before it. But the details of human tension, of whispered bargains and fiery clashes, remain half-veiled, leaving Independence Hall as the sole true witness. Outside, the streets of Philadelphia buzzed with rumors. Citizens speculated endlessly, but the hall remained tight-lipped. It held its secrets as the delegates struggled with questions larger than themselves. How much power should president hold? How should states balance equality with population? What rights must be preserved to prevent tyranny? Within that room, compromises were struck that would echo across centuries. The Great Compromise balanced small states and large. The Three-Fifths Compromise left a stain of slavery embedded within the nation's founding, and a framework of separation of powers took form. When, at last, the Constitution was signed, Franklin is said to have gestured to the carved sun upon Washington's chair, remarking that he now believed it to be a rising sun, not a setting one. That single image, a sun rising behind the chair of the general-turned-president, became a metaphor not only for convention, but for the nation itself. Independence Hall had once more delivered something extraordinary. First liberty, now law. But shadows remained. Not everyone trusted this new government. The Constitution was not universally celebrated. Critics feared it gave too much power to the central authority, too little to the states. The fight for ratification raged, and once again Independence Hall stood as a symbol at the center of controversy. Its chambers had given birth to the document, but beyond its walls, fierce battles of words and pamphlets unfolded. In taverns and town halls, ordinary citizens debated the meaning of liberty, echoing the very conversations once confined within the hall's walls. As the first presidential election approached, the hall again became a backdrop. It was here that Washington was chosen unanimously, a figure whose mere name commanded reverence. And when the new government took shape, Independence Hall seemed to breathe with a new identity, not just the birthplace of rebellion, but the womb of a republic. Legends swirl around this time, adding layers of mystery. Some say that on quiet evenings, a faint scratching sound could be heard at the assembly room tables, as though Madison's ghost continues to write. Others claim Franklin lingers still, urging compromise in whispers carried on the air. Whether true or not, such tales remind us that Independence Hall is more than brick and mortar. It is a living archive, carrying the echoes of decisions that shaped the course of history. By the end of the 18th century, Independence Hall stood as a monument to both revolution and governance. It had birthed the Declaration of Independence, endured the storms of war, and delivered the Constitution. Its legacy was no longer confined to the fight against Britain. It now embodied the enduring challenge of self-rule. For Americans and for the world, it became a beacon of possibility, a building that carried within it not only the memory of defiance, but the fragile, enduring hope that free people could govern themselves. And yet, even as a new nation marched forward, one cannot help but imagine the lingering tension in those walls, the faint scent of candle smoke, the weight of arguments that nearly tore the delegates apart. Independence Hall remains a riddle of history, its silence guarding both triumph and conflict. It is not merely where America began. It is where America risked everything to define itself, and where the greatest gamble in political history was made. The dawn of the 19th century brought with it new challenges and new stories, and yet Independence Hall refused to fade into obscurity. Its red brick walls, scarred by time, remained a silent sentinel in Philadelphia as the young nation expanded westward, wrestled with questions of identity, and teetered on the edge of division. But while new capitals were being built in Washington, D.C., and the machinery of government shifted away from Philadelphia, Independence Hall's legacy only deepened. It was no longer merely a political chamber. It was transforming into a shrine of memory, a place where the nation could return when the weight of its own existence threatened to crush it. The War of 1812 reminded Americans of the fragility of their independence. British forces stormed Washington, burning the Capitol and the White House, but the hall in Philadelphia endured untouched. For many, it became a symbol of resilience, the one structure that seemed impervious to foreign flame or domestic collapse. Citizens walked its halls with reverence, whispering of the days when Jefferson and Adams had walked the same floors. Already, a sense of myth was attaching itself to the building, an aura that blurred the line between history and legend. By the mid-19th century, as America grew more divided, the hall became a site of pilgrimage. The Liberty Bell, cracked but still majestic, had been moved into its shadow, and the tolling that once rang out on July 8, 1776, had now become silent. Yet its silence spoke louder than sound. The fracture across its side seemed to mirror the fracture in the country itself, as North and South grew restless with irreconcilable differences. Visitors would gaze at that broken bell and sense the ominous foreshadowing of a nation about to rupture. Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell together became symbols not just of freedom, but of the cost of maintaining it. When Abraham Lincoln journeyed to Philadelphia on the eve of his presidency, it was no accident that he stopped at Independence Hall. Standing inside the assembly room where the Declaration had been signed, he declared that he would rather die than surrender the principles laid down within those walls. His words carried a haunting weight, for within weeks, the nation would indeed be plunged into civil war. And when Lincoln's body was carried back through Philadelphia after his assassination, mourners gathered in Independence Hall to pay their final respects. The building had become a vessel of grief as well as hope, its floors now echoing with the footsteps of thousands who came to honor the fallen leader. The Civil War transformed the hall into a sanctuary of national memory. No longer was it simply a relic of the Revolution. It was a reminder of what unity demanded. Its image spread across newspapers, paintings, and patriotic literature, cementing its place in the American imagination. Soldiers marched off to battle believing they fought not just a flag, but for the ideals born in that room of green-draped tables and flickering candles. The hall's symbolism transcended politics. It became an altar of freedom, even as the nation bled. Yet with symbolism came whispers of the uncanny. Some claimed that late at night, when the moonlight fell through the arched windows, faint voices could be heard, echoes of men long gone, still debating liberty and law. Guides and caretakers swore they felt a chill in certain corners, as though unseen figures lingered. Legends grew of Washington's shadow appearing near his chair, of Franklin's laughter carried faintly in the stillness. Whether truth or imagination, these tales wrapped the hall in mystery, reminding visitors that it was not only a place of history, but of presence, where the past seemed never fully at rest. As decades rolled on, Independence Hall became the stage for anniversaries and commemorations. In 1876, during the nation's Centennial Exposition, crowds flooded Philadelphia, eager to reconnect with their roots. The hall was decorated, celebrated, and revered, its rooms filled with patriotic fervor. International visitors walked its corridors, seeing in America's shrine a reflection of their own struggles for freedom. It became more than a national landmark. It was a global emblem of the fight against tyranny. But its preservation was not guaranteed. Time, weather, and neglect threatened to erode its foundations. Activists and preservationists fought to save it, understanding that if the hall crumbled, so too would the tangible link to America's birth. Their efforts ensured its survival, and with each passing year, its legend only deepened. It became not just a building, but a story, one written in brick and timber, stained by candle smoke and footsteps, guarded fiercely against oblivion. By the late 19th century, Independence Hall had shifted firmly from function to symbol. It no longer held the active machinery of government, but instead stood as a memory preserved, a relic of a beginning that never truly ended. Yet to step inside was to feel the pulse of history, as if the air itself carried the weight of decisions, arguments, and dreams that had shaped not just a nation, but the world. And so, the hall entered a new phase of existence. Not a battlefield of politics, but a sanctuary of meaning. Presidents came to honor it. Citizens came to touch its walls, and travelers from distant lands came to witness the birthplace of liberty. It was no longer the beating heart of government, but it had become the beating heart of memory, a place where past and present blurred, and where the ideals of freedom stood preserved in silence, stronger than any written word. Even now, whispers linger that the hall holds more secrets than it reveals. Locked rooms, hidden stairways, forgotten documents, mysteries that fuel the imagination of those who believe that history never fully surrenders its truths. Whether those secrets exist or not, Independence Hall remains a paradox. At once silent and speaking, ancient and eternal, fragile and unbreakable. It is a place where history breathes, where the nation remembers, and where the world looks to find proof that liberty, though costly and cracked like the Liberty Bell itself, still endures. The 20th century brought new storms and new reckonings, and Independence Hall stood once more at the crossroads of history. Wars erupted abroad, new powers rose, and the world seemed to tremble on the edge of destruction. Yet amid these upheavals, the hall remained a steadfast monument, its weathered brick and white steeple whispering that the ideals of liberty must not fade. The world wars gave new meaning to its existence, as American soldiers marched overseas carrying in their hearts a vision of freedom born within those very walls. When they fought against empires and dictatorships, they fought with the memory of the Declaration and Constitution, documents that had been framed inside the hall, documents that promise human dignity even in the darkest hours. Foreign dignitaries who visited Philadelphia during those years often insisted on stepping inside the hall, as though standing in that chamber might lend them strength, as though the air itself carried the power to inspire courage against tyranny. During World War II, when democracy seemed fragile and fascism threatened to engulf continents, the hall became a gathering place for rallies, speeches, and patriotic ceremonies. It was no longer just an American relic. It became a beacon for all nations resisting oppression. Many whispered that the Liberty Bell, cracked and silent, seemed to vibrate faintly during those years, as though resonating with the cries of freedom echoing around the globe. Of course, no one could prove such a thing, but visitors swore they felt a hum in their chests when standing near it, a reminder that freedom, though wounded, was alive. These tales blurred the line between mystery and memory, giving the hall a sacred quality, something more than stone and timber, something almost alive. As the war ended and the world entered the atomic age, Independence Hall found itself cast into yet another role, that of an international symbol. In 1948, the United Nations recognized its significance by declaring it a World Heritage Site, a place not only for Americans but for all humanity. Within its walls, the ideals of self-determination and equality had been planted, and now those ideals were needed by people across the globe. Tourists from Europe, Asia, and Africa streamed into Philadelphia, eager to see the birthplace of a republic that had influenced revolutions far beyond its shores. Guides led them into the assembly room, where they would pause in silence, as if expecting to hear echoes of quills scratching on parchment or voices rising in debate. The world had begun to see Independence Hall, not merely as an American treasure, but as a universal shrine of freedom. Yet the building was not without its scars, not without its shadows. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s forced the nation to confront a painful truth. The promises written within those walls had not been fulfilled for all Americans. As marches swept across the country, and leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of justice long denied, Independence Hall took on a new resonance. It became a place where the contradiction between America's ideals and its realities could not be ignored. When King himself spoke in Philadelphia, invoking the promises of the Declaration, it was as though the ghosts of Jefferson and Franklin were listening, silently demanding that the work they had begun centuries earlier be completed at last. In those years, the hall became a stage not just for commemoration, but for confrontation. Protesters gathered outside, demanding equality, demanding that the words penned within its walls finally be lived. Some nights, people claimed to see flickering lights in its windows when no one was inside, as though the spirits of founders were restless, as though they too demanded justice. Whether these were tricks of the eye or something more, they fueled the sense that Independence Hall was not only a monument to history, but also a mirror reflecting the unfinished struggles of the present. As America moved through the turbulence of the late 20th century, Vietnam, Watergate, the Cold War, the hall stood as a reminder of accountability. Presidents came to speak there, reaffirming their loyalty to the Constitution. Crowds gathered on anniversaries, lighting candles, singing patriotic hymns, and demanding that the nation live up to the principles born inside those walls. On July 4th, 1976, during the bicentennial, millions turned their eyes to Philadelphia. Fireworks exploded above the hall, and celebrations echoed across the country. Yet many also felt a sobering reminder that liberty required constant renewal. The hall glowed in television broadcasts across the world. Its image beamed into living rooms from Tokyo to London, from Cairo to Rio, a beacon in an uncertain age. In the 21st century, Independence Hall has taken on an almost mystical aura. In the wake of the September 11 attacks, Americans returned to it seeking reassurance. Crowds gathered, candles in hand, searching for meaning in the same place where freedom had once been declared against tyranny. The hall seemed to remind them that liberty was always fragile, always at risk, but also always enduring. Tourists from around the globe continued to arrive, whispering in reverence as they stepped inside, as if entering a sacred temple. Guides told them of debates that shaped nations, but many visitors said they felt something deeper, a weight in the air, a quiet that pressed against the skin, as though the building itself remembered more than it ever revealed. Even today, stories persist. Guards claim to hear footsteps when the hall is empty, the heavy tread of boots echoing on the old wooden floors. Some say the smell of pipe smoke drifts through the assembly room at night, long after the doors are locked, perhaps Franklin himself unwilling to leave. Others report fleeting shadows near Washington's chair, a figure vanishing just as quickly as it appears. Whether one believes in such tales or not, they add to Hall's mystique, ensuring that it is never only history, but mystery as well. Now, as the world wrestles with new crises, political unrest, climate change, the struggle for human rights, the Hall continues to stand. Its steeple rises over Philadelphia not as an artifact of the past, but as a reminder that freedom is a story always being written, never complete. Its bricks are old, its floors worn, but within those walls the world still sees a promise. That liberty, once declared, must be defended in every generation. Independence Hall is no longer just a birthplace of America. It is a living symbol of humanity's eternal quest for dignity and freedom. And perhaps it is why, when the night is quiet and the city sleeps, its windows seem to glow faintly, as if the ideals born there still burn with an undying fire. Through centuries of triumph and turmoil, Independence Hall has stood watch, a silent guardian of the ideals that shape nations. Its bricks carry the weight of battles fought, dreams pursued, and promises yet unfulfilled. Perhaps that is why it feels alive, why its windows glow faintly in the night, why whispers still seem to drift through its halls. Independence Hall is more than history. It is a reminder that freedom is fragile, eternal, and always waiting for the next generation to claim it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to History Vault, your gateway to the past.